what you think. Look,
Hey guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 154th episode of my series, where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it has, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. So if you're a more modern hip-hop fan who's yet to go too far back, or maybe you're a relatively new listener who just has a casual relationship with underground hip-hop, you may only know Madlib as one half of the infamous duo Mad Villainy with MF Doom, or perhaps you know him for his more recent work with Freddie Gibbs like Pinata or Bandana. However, if you're an older head or just an enthusiast for 90s, 2000s hip hop, you may know Madlib as one third of the legendary trio Loot Pack alongside DJ Rome's and Wild Child. They had already made a name for themselves as part of the Liquid crew alongside acts like Exhibit or, of course, the Alcoholics. I'm going to discuss Loot Pack's classic debut sound pieces to Antidote in my next set coming up after this one. So when I get there, I'll delve a bit deeper into this trio and their affiliation with hip hop mogul Peanut Butter Wolf and how that legend ultimately did the networking and micromanaging required to get an up and coming Madlib in the room with a relatively young MF Doom, who at that point was as elusive as ever, and really didn't trust any other producer to be able to exist in the same sonic world he lived within, let alone attempt to add and build onto it. But somehow we were lucky enough that PB Wolf somehow managed to get Doom to give Madlib a chance, and from there the rest is history, with the two releasing what's pretty easily the most celebrated hip hop album of the last 25 years, most definitely of the 2000s. Of course, that magnum opus was featured on this page forever ago at this point, but I'll still link it down below in the description if you want to give it a watch, because as any Mad Villain fan knows, a pretty sizable chunk of the features on that masterpiece come from Madlib's alter ego that he pretty frequently would opt to rap through, which is Quasimoto. Of course, borrowing the name from the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Lord Quas has always been an avenue for Madlib to not just have a separate character who lends himself to cartoons and various mixed media, but he uniquely uses an altered voice that's pitched way higher than pretty much any other voice in the game by a wide margin. But it isn't really like Danny Brown, where he's kind of straining to reach that high register. With Quasimoto, it's all done with a vocal filter in post, or the way that they did it back then, I believe, was actually to slow the recording down and then have Quas rap along at that glacial pace, then put the track back up to normal speed later, achieving that distinctive pitch he became known for. What's kind of interesting to me is how if you ever research this alter ego and its creation, you'll likely see statements regarding how this voice was birthed out of Madlib himself, despising his normal rap voice, finding it too boring or plain. I personally found Madlib's work with Doom long before I got put onto Loot Pack, so I remember being a bit confused when I learned how Madlib already had a pretty successful career as an MC prior to this album or his work with Doom, since I guess I had assumed that Madlib not being a fan of his own rap voice must have meant that he didn't really attempt a rap career up until this, which of course isn't true. But the weird thing is Madlib actually already had introduced the Quasimodo character on the first Loot Pack album, and while I understand everyone interprets their own voice differently, personally I feel like there wasn't really much of an issue with how he was rapping before. I'd argue he was definitely one of the denser and more experimental writers at the time. Of course, his forward-thinking production style was already putting him and Stone's Throw on the map to a large degree, but his solo debut as Quasimodo still came years before his affiliation with the supervillain. This meant that 2000's The Unseen was the first project to take the character introduced on his group debut the year before and flesh it out into a full-length studio album, where Lord Quas is the captain of this audio vessel. An interesting little fact that I'm not sure if everyone's aware of is that Quasimoto actually refers to the duo consisting of Madlib and Lord Quas, but I tend to use them interchangeably since obviously they're the same person. Madlib's unaltered, more monotone vocal style is something he kind of keeps in his back pocket, but still whips out relatively frequently to provide a sonic contrast and break from the normal Quasimoto helium type voice, as well as providing him the opportunity to create back and forths between himself and his own character, which is pretty artistic, creative, and ahead of its time. It also shows that even before Madlib and Doom would become partners in crime, they were unknowingly making music for the same fan bases, just on different coasts, and with their shared affinity for alter egos and obscure reference material, they had much more in common than they did separating them. Aside from the vocals, the instrumental soundscapes Madlib builds here are the perfect backdrop for the album cover, as you could just put on the beats from this LP front to back, and it would be a fitting soundtrack for a wacky car chase where we root for our anti-hero to escape the authorities. That too is another aspect of his work I feel he would hone in on and polish a few years down the line, with the entire vibe that's being painted on Low Class Conspiracy really not being dissimilar to the environment that gets painted on the Mad Villain album. But with that Quasimoto track, it's actually about much more than just some bad guy trying to escape the cops in a car chase. Instead, this is much more of a racial think piece about how potentially innocent young black men often get used as the scapegoat or target, and how the disingenuous intentions of certain policemen can go overlooked or just unpunished completely. Lord Quaz weaves a vivid and relatable story where he paints out the double standards with "Get on the freeway, yo, it's after dark. Guess who always pulls up right behind us? It's some narcs." Letting all kinds of speeding cars pass just so they can harass our black asses. Police pulling us over for no reason, searching the car like it's black man hunting season. Madlib was really starting to perfect his idiosyncratic production style at this time, with most of the beats on The Unseen bridging the gap between grimy and more chill and soulful. He would arguably push this line even further, not just through his solo work on Stone's Throw, but his collaboration with fellow beat-making goat Jay Dilla, 2003's J-Lib, which I'm sure I'll get around to at some point sooner or later on the channel, as it's arguably the most experimental undertaking Madlib or even Dilla had tackled up until that time. The debut here as Quasimoto, as forward-thinking and creative as it is, still falls a bit more on the easy listening side, which is really a positive and definitely intended for this experience. I'd argue a lot of the music on this LP is actually a bit easier to digest than most of his other output, which I feel was him displaying his role as an early pioneer of that kind of chill, lo-fi, beats to study to sound that other legends like Burial or Nujabes would help add on to down the line. I also love Madlib's samples and chops on The Unseen. His reference material is A1 as always, and the little snippet he uses from what I believe was an old Cannabis freestyle, for some reason has always made the first few seconds before the beat change on Real Eyes so addicting to me. While Quasimoto, unsurprisingly, handles all the production in-house on here, there are actually a couple of other guest appearances, including MED, formerly known as Metaphor, Wild Child, and Mr. Herb. For honorable mentions here, I think I'm gonna have to go with Come On Feet, Boom Music, Bluffin', MHBs, Put a Curse on You, Astro Black, The Unseen, and Disciple 99 Parts 0 and 1. My three favorite songs overall on this slightly underground classic would probably have to be Real Lies, Low Class Conspiracy, and Axe Puzzles. Thank you for watching my 154th video. We only have one album left for this group, so tune in to see what classic I'm going to finish this set off with. And if you enjoyed, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite songs off this Alter Ego's debut are. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.
Who would do such a thing? Look, I stand in the flame of a feeling we call pain. Father's Day mug, little hand shaped in clay. Carrier planes flew overhead in pockets.